The Forgotten Room. When I moved into my new place, I was excited and full of hope. It was a small apartment located in a quiet, older part of the city, and the price was exactly what I could afford. The building had that old charm that I loved: creaky floors, peeling paint, and the smell of age-old wood. The landlord, a kindly old man, gave me the keys and assured me that the building had been well maintained. I didn't think much of it at first. I was just happy to finally have my own space after months of looking. But as soon as I started settling in, something felt off. I couldn't place my finger on it. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. There was no noise from neighbors, no footsteps in the hallways, no distant chatter through thin walls. It felt like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something. One evening, after moving in most of my things, I decided to explore the old closets and storage areas. I came across a small, rusty key wedged between some old, forgotten boxes in the back of the closet. It looked ancient, and the tag attached to it was even more curious. It simply read, "Room 407. Don't go in." The words were handwritten in a faded, almost illegible script. I was confused. The apartment building only had 5 floors, and there was no room 407 listed anywhere in the building's layout. I had seen the building's plans when I first toured the apartment, and room 407 didn't exist. I shrugged it off, assuming it was some kind of prank or an old key that had been left behind by a previous tenant. But the more I looked at it, the more it seemed significant. It didn't belong with the other keys. It was different. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tossed and turned in bed, the key heavy in my thoughts. Finally, unable to shake my curiosity, I decided to go see if I could find room 407. What harm could it do, right? I left my apartment and walked down the hall. It was past midnight, and the building was eerily still, with no sound except for the faint hum of the old elevator in the distance. I reached the 4th floor and looked around. There, at the end of the hall, was a door that I hadn't noticed before. It was old, with peeling paint and a rusty doorknob. Room 407. I walked toward it slowly, heart pounding in my chest. The air seemed to grow colder as I approached. The key felt heavy in my hand, as if it was urging me to use it. My fingers trembled as I inserted the key into the lock. The sound it made was like a low click, one that echoed through the silence of the hallway. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I hesitated, my pulse racing. But something inside me, the curiosity, the pull of something unknown, urged me forward. I stepped into the room. At first, the room seemed normal enough. The air was thick with dust, and the musty smell of decay hung in the air. It was a small, square room, about the size of a closet, with old wooden floorboards and cracked walls. There was nothing in the room, no furniture, no decorations. Just emptiness. But as I looked around, I felt an unmistakable chill creeping over me. The temperature dropped as if I had stepped into a different world, a place where time had no meaning. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. The walls seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly, like they were alive, watching me. I felt eyes on me, no, not eyes. Something else. A loud bang echoed from behind me, making me jump. My heart skipped a beat. I whipped around, but there was nothing. Just the empty room, as still as death. I took a step toward the door, but as I did, something caught my eye. A small object sat on the floor next to the corner, partially hidden by the dust. I knelt down to inspect it and found it to be an old photograph. The edges were frayed, and the picture was faded with age. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands. The photo showed a woman standing next to a chair, her expression cold and unreadable. She had dark hair and wore a simple dress, and she looked like she was from a time long past. But what caught my attention wasn't the woman in the photograph. It was the chair she was standing next to. The very same chair that sat in the center of the room, its wood cracked and worn. I shuddered. There was something unsettling about the way she looked, the emptiness in her eyes. I turned the photo over, and there, scrawled in jagged handwriting, was a message. "Don't sit in the chair." The air grew heavier. I could feel the weight of something watching me, a presence that was suffocating in its silence. I didn't want to, but my eyes were drawn to the chair. I couldn't look away. The whisper was faint at first, like a distant wind, but then it grew louder. "Leave, now." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I slowly stood up, my legs unsteady. The whispers continued, like 1,000 voices murmuring just beyond the reach of my hearing. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, it slammed shut on its own with a deafening crash. My breath caught in my throat as I turned around, panicking. I pressed myself against the door, trying to open it, but it refused to budge. The handle was cold beneath my fingers, and the wood seemed to grow heavier by the second. The whispering intensified, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on me, suffocating me with their presence. I tried to calm myself, thinking it was just my imagination. But as I glanced around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The woman from the photograph, the one who had been standing beside the chair, was now standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me. But it wasn't the woman from the photograph. She looked different. Her face was twisted in a grotesque expression, her features distorting as though she was trying to scream. But no sound came out. Her eyes, once empty and cold, were now filled with a deep, terrifying malice. The chair creaked as if something was sitting in it. Something that had been waiting for me. I stepped backward, my chest tightening in fear. The room felt like it was spinning, and I was losing my grip on reality. The whispers were no longer distant, they were all around me, suffocating me. "Sit in the chair," the voices crooned, their words overlapping. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mind screamed for me to run, to escape, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The chair beckoned me. I could feel it, pulling me in. With one last burst of panic, I reached for the door again, throwing my weight against it. This time, it opened. The light from the hallway flooded in, and the room, the presence, seemed to recede just enough for me to escape. I ran down the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the cold air, gasping for breath. I turned around to look at the building, but the window on the 4th floor was dark. The room was empty again. The next morning, I returned to the building, but when I reached the 4th floor, room 407 was gone. The door wasn't there. There was no sign that it had ever existed. I moved out that same day, and I haven't looked back. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the whispers. And I know that whatever was in that room is still waiting for someone to sit in the chair. The Forgotten Room, Part 4. Weeks passed after I moved out, but I couldn't shake the feeling of what had happened in that room. It haunted my dreams, the whispers calling to me from the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I tried to reach out to the landlord, to ask about the room, but he was never available. I sent him messages, left voicemails, but he never responded. It was as if he had disappeared, just like room 407. I didn't even know if he was still alive. For all I knew, he could have been hiding something, maybe even involved in whatever darkness that room held. Then one day, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. I hadn't been expecting anything, especially not after leaving the apartment. I tore open the envelope, my hands trembling as I pulled out the single sheet of paper. It read, "You should have never left. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I didn't know who had sent it, but the handwriting was eerily familiar. I knew it wasn't the landlord's. It was too neat, too deliberate. But it felt like a warning, a reminder of the room I had left behind. That night, I found myself back at the building, standing in front of the old door to room 407. It was still gone, replaced by a wall of drywall, as though it had never existed. But I knew better. I could feel the room still there, hiding just beneath the surface. I placed my hand on the wall, my fingers tracing the faint outline of where the door once was. The moment I touched it, the air around me shifted. I felt a cold breeze sweep through the hall, and the whispers returned, this time louder, more urgent. They were calling my name, over and over again. You shouldn't have come back. I stepped back quickly, my breath coming in short gasps. I turned and fled the building, not looking back once. The days that followed were filled with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. The whispers became louder, more persistent. They followed me, curling in the corners of my mind, no matter where I went. I started losing sleep. I stopped eating. I couldn't focus on anything, consumed by the thought of what I had experienced. I even began to hear the whispers when I wasn't in the building. At work, in the grocery store, even in the quiet of my own home, I would hear them. Just faint murmurs at first, but then they grew clearer, more demanding. Come back, they would say. Come back and sit in the chair. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just me. Something was calling to me, something dark and ancient that had been trapped inside that room. I realized then that I hadn't just discovered a room, I had unlocked something much worse. Something that had been waiting for years, maybe even decades, to be set free. Desperation led me to a search for any answers I could find. I went online, researching the building's history. After days of digging through archives and public records, I found something that made my blood run cold. The building had once been home to a family, the Darnells. They had lived there for generations, but the family had vanished without a trace over 50 years ago. The last member, a woman named Clarissa Darnell, was reported missing, and the police had never found her. No one knew what had happened to them, and the apartment building had been abandoned for years before it was reopened for new tenants. I couldn't believe it. Clarissa Darnell, the woman in the photograph. Her photo had been old, but she looked so familiar. She was standing next to the very chair that had been in room 407, her face cold and empty. The message in the photo, "Don't sit in the chair," was a warning, but it had been too late for her. I realized now that the room wasn't just a place, it was a trap. Room 407 had become a prison, a place where time stood still, and something had been waiting for someone to open it. Someone had been waiting for someone to sit in the chair. I couldn't shake the thought that the whispers were now trying to lure me back to that chair, to complete what had been started. I was part of the curse now. I began to lose track of time. Days blended together, and the voices in my mind grew louder. They were no longer whispers, they were demands, commands, all pulling me toward room 407, toward the chair. I couldn't escape it. I tried to avoid the building, tried to forget about the key and the photo, but every night I found myself back at the door. It was as if I had no control over my actions anymore. My feet would carry me there, my hand would touch the spot where the door had been, and I would feel the cold presence, waiting, just beyond the walls. Then, one evening, the building was different. The air was thicker, heavier, and the whispers were louder, almost deafening. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. They carried me forward, up the stairs, to the 4th floor. I stood in front of the wall where room 407 once stood. Suddenly, the wall cracked. A small fissure appeared, and from within it, the old wooden door began to form, piece by piece, as if it were being rebuilt from the inside out. I watched in horror as the door materialized before my eyes, the key in my hand shaking uncontrollably. It was time. The chair was waiting. I knew this was my moment. The curse had come full circle. I inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, and a wave of cold rushed over me. The room was exactly as it had been before, the chair sitting in the center, its dark presence filling the air. The whispers were deafening now, urging me to sit. I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. I reached the chair and sat down. The room went silent. And then everything changed. The walls stretched and distorted, the air thick with a presence I couldn't explain. It was as if I had crossed into another world, one where time had no meaning, and the chair was the anchor, keeping me trapped in that moment. I saw Clarissa Darnell, her face twisted in agony, her eyes locked on mine. She reached out to me, her hands like claws. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I tried to scream, to escape, but I couldn't. I was trapped, just like she had been. The lights in the woods. It was supposed to be the perfect camping trip. A weekend getaway with friends to the woods, away from the distractions of everyday life. We had decided to go deep into the forest, far enough that there was no cell service, no noisy roads, just nature at its finest. The air was crisp, the trees tall and ancient, and the campsite we found was secluded enough to give us that sense of being alone in the wilderness. We set up our tents near a clearing, gathering around a campfire as the sun dipped below the horizon. Laughter and conversation filled the air as we cracked open drinks and enjoyed the company. The crackling of the fire and the chirps of nocturnal animals added to the peaceful atmosphere. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so relaxed, so disconnected from the chaos of the outside world. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep in, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The woods around us felt different. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in an unsettling way, almost as if the trees were whispering secrets to each other. Still, I pushed the thought aside and focused on the present, enjoying the moment with my friends. Later in the evening, after the fire had burned down to embers, I noticed something strange. A faint flickering light in the distance, just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, the shadows of the trees dancing in the dimming light. But no. It was a light, like the glow of a distant lantern. I pointed it out to my friends, but they didn't seem concerned. Probably another group of campers, one of them said, dismissing it with a wave. But something in the way the light flickered, almost too erratically, didn't sit right with me. I decided to investigate. The rest of the group was too drunk or too content to care, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the lights, telling them I'd be back in a bit. The woods were dense, and the path was overgrown with vines and branches. As I walked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me, casting long shadows in the beam of my flashlight. The light I had seen earlier flickered again, much closer now. It wasn't coming from a campfire or a lantern. It was as if the light was floating, dancing just above the ground. It blinked in and out, glowing faintly, then vanishing for a moment before reappearing. I quickened my pace, my curiosity getting the better of me. As I neared the source, the light stopped moving. It hovered in the air, just beyond my reach. It wasn't warm like a fire, it had an unnatural, cold glow to it. I stopped in my tracks, staring at it. My breath came in short bursts as I tried to process what I was seeing. "Hello?" I called out, half expecting someone to respond. But no answer came. The light flickered again, this time more erratically, as if it were aware of my presence. Suddenly, I heard something else, an odd, low sound that seemed to come from deeper within the woods. It was hard to describe, like a low hum, vibrating in my chest. The light began to grow brighter, flashing intermittently, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right. I turned around to head back to the campsite, but before I could take a step, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. My feet slipped in the mud, and I lost my balance, stumbling into the underbrush. I landed on the ground with a thud, and the light flickered one last time before disappearing completely, plunging me into complete darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my flashlight, quickly turning it on to illuminate the path back. But when I looked around, everything had changed. The trees looked different, twisted in odd angles, their trunks gnarled and unfamiliar. The forest felt alive, and not in a good way. I stumbled back to the campsite, my breath ragged, trying to shake off the overwhelming sense of dread. My friends didn't seem to notice anything was wrong when I returned, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. But I could still feel the cold presence of the forest around me. The woods weren't what they seemed. The next morning, I tried to put the incident behind me. I didn't want to freak out my friends, so I kept it to myself. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that floating light in my mind's eye, its erratic flickering and the cold hum in the air. We spent the rest of the day exploring the area. The forest was vast, filled with towering trees and thick brush. It felt serene, peaceful, but there was something off about the place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the woods had eyes I couldn't see, but could feel just beyond my vision. Later in the afternoon, we gathered around the campfire again, enjoying the warmth of the flames. It was a quiet evening, with only the sounds of the crackling fire and the occasional owl hoot breaking the silence. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the trees, and the sky was turning a dusky purple. Then, without warning, the light returned. At first, it was just a faint flicker on the edge of my vision, but then it grew, steadily moving closer. I blinked a few times, thinking it was just a trick of the light. But no, it was the same cold, flickering light from last night. It hovered between the trees, darting in and out of view, as though it were teasing me. I stood up, heart racing. I looked at my friends, but they hadn't noticed it yet. They were laughing, talking, too distracted to see what was happening. I didn't want to go back into the woods alone again, but I couldn't just ignore it. I had to know what it was. "Hey, I'm going to check something out," I said quickly, without waiting for a response. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the light again, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked deeper into the trees, the light became more erratic, flickering wildly, moving faster now. It darted between the trunks of the trees like it was trying to lead me somewhere. I followed it, determined to find out what was causing it. The air around me grew colder, the forest quieting as I moved deeper. My flashlight flickered and dimmed, the battery seemingly dying at the worst possible time. I cursed under my breath, trying to push forward in the growing dark. Then, without warning, the light stopped. It hovered just ahead, brighter than ever, and for the first time, I could hear something else. A whisper. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder as I drew closer. "Come closer." I froze. The voice wasn't human. It was distorted, like an echo, or perhaps a reflection of something deeper in the woods. I could feel my chest tighten with fear, but I couldn't turn back now. I stepped forward, and the light flickered again, vanishing in an instant. A chill ran through me as I looked around, trying to find it. But instead of the light, I saw something else, something moving between the trees. A figure. Tall, shadowy, and unnatural. It was too tall, its limbs too long. It wasn't like a human at all. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring into the forest where the figure had been. The whispers continued, now growing louder, closer. "Come closer, join us." Suddenly, I snapped out of it. I turned and ran, pushing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. The figure didn't follow, but the whispering continued, echoing in my ears, urging me deeper into the woods. I didn't stop running until I was back at the campsite, out of breath and covered in mud. My friends were still laughing and drinking by the fire, unaware of what I had just seen. I didn't tell them. I couldn't. I wasn't sure if they would believe me anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in the woods, the tall, twisted shape standing just out of view. The whispers were constant, always there, echoing in my mind, filling the space between my thoughts. Around midnight, I heard a noise outside the tent. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just an animal, but the noise grew louder, closer. I slowly unzipped the tent, peeking out into the darkness. The air was still, but there was a faint glow coming from the trees. Not the usual moonlight or the reflection of a fire. This was different. Cold, unnatural. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, but before I could move, the whispers returned. Louder this time. I could feel the presence of something watching me, standing just beyond the tree line. I didn't want to go out there again, but I knew I had to. The light was calling me. I stepped out of the tent, moving toward the edge of the camp. The glow grew brighter as I got closer, illuminating the trees around me. The figure from earlier was gone, but the light was still there, flickering in and out, like it was trying to lead me somewhere. The whispers had turned into a chant. A rhythmic, hypnotic chant, calling me deeper into the woods. Join us, join us. I took a deep breath and pushed forward, stepping into the woods once more. The light flickered and danced between the trees, moving with a strange sense of purpose. I followed it again, my heartbeat thundering in my chest, and though every part of me screamed to turn back, I couldn't. I had to know what it was. The deeper I ventured into the woods, the more disorienting everything became. The trees around me were towering giants, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The light flickered, now hovering just beyond my reach, as if teasing me, drawing me in. The forest felt unnaturally silent. The usual nighttime sounds of crickets, owls, and the rustling of animals had stopped. Everything was still, except for the eerie hum of the lights and the whispers that now seemed to surround me. The voices were no longer distant, they were in my head, each word felt like it was being whispered directly into my ear. Come closer, we're waiting. I fought the overwhelming urge to turn back. The farther I went, the colder the air grew. It wasn't just the temperature, it was as if the very essence of the forest had changed. It felt alive, pulsating with a dark, unseen energy. Finally, the light stopped moving, hovering in front of me, floating just above the ground. I stood there, staring at it. It wasn't like any natural light I had ever seen. There was no warmth, no source, no flame or lantern. It was as if the light itself was a creature, born from the forest itself, made of something ancient and otherworldly. I took a step forward, my legs heavy, but my body compelled to move. As I did, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was changing. The trees bent and warped, distorting into shapes I could barely comprehend. Then, the whispers stopped. Silence. It was deafening. The light flickered once, twice, then dimmed entirely. I stood in complete darkness, the weight of the forest pressing in on me. I had no idea how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the same twisted trees, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers. You shouldn't have come. The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a low, guttural tone, like it was coming from the very ground beneath me. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. I felt as though I was suffocating, like something dark and ancient was pulling at me, threatening to consume me. I looked around, panic rising in my chest. The forest was closing in on me, the trees narrowing, their trunks warping in unnatural angles. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling around me, overwhelming me with their urgency. Sit with us, become one with the forest. I staggered backward, my feet slipping on the uneven ground. I turned and ran, not caring about the direction, just desperate to get away. The darkness behind me seemed to move, chasing me with the sound of snapping branches and the faintest echo of that same haunting whisper. I ran for what felt like hours, my legs burning, my chest tight with panic. The further I ran, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to shift with every step I took, and the whispering was all around me, suffocating me, guiding me further into the maze of the forest. And then, just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, I burst through the trees. I found myself standing at the edge of the clearing where our campsite had been. The fire was out, the campsite deserted. My friends were gone. I looked around, my breath ragged. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. The air felt heavy with the same presence I had felt earlier, but there was no sign of anyone. I called out their names, but no response. The only sound was the rustling of the trees in the wind. I stumbled back toward the campfire, desperate to make sense of what had just happened. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but it clung to me, suffocating, like the darkness itself had followed me out of the woods. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, movement in the trees at the edge of the clearing. The faint glow of light. The same light. I turned, but it was already gone. Just like everything else. I was left standing in the cold silence, alone. The days after that night were a blur. I tried to piece together what had happened, but no one would believe me. When I returned to the campsite, there was no sign of my friends. No trace of the laughter or joy that had filled the air just hours before. It was as if they had never been there. I contacted the authorities, but when they arrived, they found nothing. The campsite was abandoned, with no indication of foul play. They searched the woods, but no one was ever found. My friends had vanished, and I was left with only the lingering memories of the forest, the whispers, the lights, the cold presence that had chased me. Since that night, I've never gone back to the woods. Every time I close my eyes, I can still see the glow of the lights, flickering in the darkness. I can still hear the whispers in my mind, urging me to return, to join them. But I know better now. The forest is not just a place. It's a doorway. A threshold between our world and something darker. And once you've crossed it, there's no turning back. I've tried to forget what happened, tried to bury it deep within me, but the whispers still haunt me. They're always there, just beyond the reach of my consciousness. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel that cold hand on my shoulder again, and I know that whatever is in the woods is still watching, still waiting for me to return. The lights are out there, flickering in the distance, calling me back. And I know, deep down, that one day I will answer. The phone call. It was late, past midnight, when I received the call. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. I almost ignored it. I didn't recognize the number, and I was tired from a long day. But something made me pick it up anyway. Something in the pit of my stomach told me that I should. I answered, my voice groggy. Hello? At first, there was nothing but silence on the other end. No breathing. No clicks. Just a heavy stillness. I waited, my thumb hovering over the end call button, ready to hang up. But then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard it. A soft breath. Almost like a sigh. It came from the other side of the line, followed by a faint, hushed whisper. Can you hear me? The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakably clear. It was like it was coming from a long distance, or maybe just from a place outside of reality itself. My heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. The voice was slow, deliberate, and oddly familiar. I need your help." I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. I didn't recognize the voice, but something about it sent a cold shiver through my spine. "Who are you?" I asked again, a little more forcefully. "What do you want?" But the voice didn't answer. Instead, I could hear the sound of something scraping softly in the background, like nails on a chalkboard. The air around me seemed to grow thick, pressing in. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the seconds stretched into eternity. And then, just like that, the call ended. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My hand shook as I placed the phone back on the nightstand. My mind raced with questions. Was it a prank? A wrong number? But something about the call didn't sit right with me. The voice, the distorted, desperate tone, it was too real, too urgent to just be some random telemarketer. I tried to shake it off and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing that voice in my head, the way it had whispered, "I need your help." Who was it? What did they want? And why had they called me? The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted, drained. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I got ready for the day, I checked my phone again. The number was blocked, no contact information, no way to trace it. It was as though the call had come from nowhere, and the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. I went through my day, trying to push the strange event out of my mind. But that afternoon, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, debating whether or not to pick it up. I had to know what it was. I had to. I answered the call, heart pounding. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. This time, the response wasn't immediate. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by what sounded like someone shuffling or breathing heavily. The voice from before finally spoke again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't distorted, just cold, almost hollow. "It's you, isn't it?" I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. That voice, it sounded almost like mine, but twisted, as though it were speaking from someplace deep inside me. My mind raced. "What do you want?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. The voice chuckled softly, a low, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "It's not what I want," it said. "It's what you want. Isn't it?" I didn't know what to say. My mind was reeling. Why was this happening to me? Why was I being contacted by this voice? I could barely focus on what was being said. Everything felt distant, unreal, like I was caught in some dream or nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. "Who are you?" I demanded again. "What do you want from me?" But the voice didn't answer. Instead, it whispered something else, something I couldn't make out. Then the line went dead again, leaving me in silence. I slammed my hand down on the desk, frustrated. This couldn't be real. It didn't make sense. There had to be an explanation, but what? My thoughts were clouded, and my anxiety was rising with every passing minute. That night, I didn't answer the phone when it rang again. I couldn't bring myself to. But the call wasn't the end of it. It was only the beginning. That night, the call didn't come. For the first time in days, I actually managed to sleep, though my dreams were restless. The whispers from the phone echoed in my mind, keeping me awake in my own thoughts. But the next day, the calls started again. Every few hours, at random times, the phone would ring. Every time I picked it up, it was the same distorted voice, repeating the same words. "It's you, isn't it? Come closer. You can't escape." I tried everything I could think of to stop the calls. I blocked the number. I turned off my phone. I even changed my number. But no matter what I did, the calls kept coming. They never stopped. The voice became more desperate each time, urging me to listen, to understand, to come closer. It was like something was reaching out from beyond the phone, pulling at my soul. Then, one night, something changed. I answered the phone as usual, expecting the same distorted whisper. But this time, it was different. The voice was clearer, more distinct. It wasn't distorted anymore. "I've been waiting." The words chilled me to the core. I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was closing in on me. "Who is this?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. There was a long silence. Then, the voice spoke again, but this time, it was like it was coming from inside my head, like the words were being spoken by a part of me I didn't recognize. "You know who I am." I froze. The voice, it was me. But not quite. It was like a reflection, a darker version of myself, speaking from some twisted place beyond the veil of reality. I tried to hang up, but my hand wouldn't move. My phone felt glued to my ear. The whispers started again, growing louder, overlapping with the voice. It was as if the phone was no longer just a phone, it had become a portal, a connection to something that wasn't supposed to be. "Come closer. Come find me." I felt my knees buckle, my body shaking. The voice wasn't just a voice anymore. It was pulling at me, drawing me in. I could almost hear the desperation in its tone. The longer I listened, the more I felt like I was losing myself. And then, the call ended. Just like before. But it wasn't the end. The whispers didn't stop. They were in my head now. They were all around me. And as the days passed, I began to see things, shadows in the corners of my vision, fleeting figures in the reflection of windows. The line between reality and whatever this voice was started to blur. I knew one thing for sure, whatever was calling me wasn't just a prank. It wasn't just a phone call. It was something darker, something that had been waiting for me. The calls continued, but I could no longer distinguish them from the whispers in my mind. It felt as though the voice had become part of me, an inescapable presence that followed me everywhere. I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together, and my grip on reality began to slip. One night, in a fit of desperation, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number that had haunted me for so long. I didn't know why I did it. It was like a compulsion, a need to understand. I held the phone to my ear, waiting for the familiar voice to answer. But when it did, it wasn't the same voice. It was mine. "Come closer. Come find me." I dropped the phone in horror as the words echoed in my head. The voice was no longer distant, it was right here, with me, inside me. And that's when I understood. The voice hadn't been calling me. It had been me all along. I had been calling myself, drawing myself into this darkness. I stood there, shaking, knowing that I couldn't escape. The line had been blurred, and I was no longer sure where I ended and the voice began. I answered the call. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt truly awake. I couldn't remember when I had slept properly, or when I had eaten more than a few bites of food. I was constantly listening, waiting for the phone to ring again. It always did, like clockwork, that same distorted voice in my ear. But this time, the calls started to change. They were no longer just brief conversations. They began to last longer, each one more intense than the last. The voice, my voice, started to give me details. Little pieces of my life, things I hadn't told anyone. I'd hear it whisper about moments in my past, memories I thought I had buried long ago. Remember when you were 6? You were sitting by the window, waiting for your mother to come home, it would say, its tone flat, emotionless. Remember the way you felt when she didn't show up? I'd hear it every day. Over and over again. It wasn't just recalling memories, it was using them against me, twisting them, distorting them. Each call was more personal. The voice would mimic the way I thought, speak the words I would say in my head, and make me doubt everything I had ever known. Do you think this is real? It asked me one day. Or is it just a dream? Have you ever really been alone? I tried to block it out. I tried everything I could to make it stop, changing my number, turning off my phone, even throwing it out. But the calls kept coming, one after another. I could feel the presence of the voice creeping into every corner of my life. And then, the voice started to speak in more cryptic terms. It's not about what you think. It's about what you want. Every word it spoke felt like a thread weaving around me, pulling tighter and tighter until I was suffocating. I couldn't escape. I couldn't even trust myself anymore. Was I hearing this voice because I had done something wrong? Had I unlocked something I wasn't supposed to know? One night, I decided to confront it. I didn't know how, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep running. I needed to face whatever this was head on. So I grabbed my phone and dialed the number again, the one that had been calling me. The one I had grown terrified of. The phone rang 3 times before it picked up, and this time, I wasn't prepared for what I heard. It wasn't just the voice of me, it was like a choir of voices, layered on top of each other, whispering, breathing. It was my voice, but there were others, faint echoes, like shadows of myself. I've been waiting, the voice said again, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus. The voices bled together, overlapping. Waiting for you to remember. My heart raced as I realized that I wasn't talking to just one entity. I was talking to something that had existed in pieces, something that was growing, taking form. The voices weren't just memories, they were parts of me, parts one had long since forgotten or pushed away. You're not just hearing this, the voice continued, now becoming more urgent. You're creating it. I felt my stomach twist. What do you mean? What are you trying to say? I asked, barely able to hold the phone steady in my hand. The voice became clearer, colder. This isn't a call. This is a connection. You've been pulling us in, piece by piece. Do you remember the game you used to play as a child? The one where you tried to build your own reflection in the mirror? The question struck me like a slap across the face. I had forgotten all about that game. When I was a child, I used to stand in front of the mirror, trying to make my reflection do what I wanted it to. I would imagine it moving, doing things that weren't real. But it was just a game, a child's game. Or so I thought. Now, as the voice spoke those words, it became clear to me that I had never stopped playing that game. I hadn't been just playing with my reflection, I had been pulling pieces of myself out of the reflection, out of the things I thought I had imagined, until they had grown too strong to ignore. Come closer, the voice whispered. Come closer and remember what you've done. I could feel the walls closing in. I could feel the darkness moving in around me, suffocating the room. The phone pressed hard against my ear, but I couldn't bring myself to hang up. It was as though the phone itself had become a lifeline, a tether connecting me to something I couldn't understand, but that I was now a part of. I heard the voice, now familiar, say something I hadn't expected. This is your choice. This is the game you've been playing, the one where you decide how much of yourself you're willing to lose. I froze. This wasn't just a call. This wasn't just some twisted reflection. This was me, pulling myself into something darker, something deeper than I could ever understand. The days after the call were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slipping further away from myself. The phone calls kept coming, relentless and unyielding. But now, they felt different. The voice wasn't just speaking, it was reaching for me. It was as if it was no longer a voice I was hearing. It was part of me, an extension of myself, and I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just my thoughts anymore, it was my actions. I would find myself doing things I couldn't explain. I would walk to the phone, pick it up, and dial the number without thinking. I wasn't in control anymore. The voice was. It had become a part of me. I began to notice changes. Subtle things at first. Things I brushed off as coincidences. My reflection in the mirror seemed to linger a moment too long, staring back at me with eyes that didn't quite match my own. Shadows seemed to move when they shouldn't, flickering out of the corner of my eye. The air grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the house itself were closing in around me. Then, one night, everything changed. I answered the phone again, but this time, it wasn't just a voice. It was a presence. The air around me felt thick, almost like something was pressing in, suffocating me. "I told you, didn't I?" the voice said. "You can't escape. You never could." I didn't know what to do. The voice wasn't just my voice anymore, it was all of me, every dark corner of myself I had locked away. I had tried to run from it, but I couldn't. It was inside me now. "The game is over. And you've already lost." The phone line went dead. But as I stood there in the silence, I realized something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The voice wasn't gone. It was with me now. The reflection wasn't just something I played with as a child, it was me. It was always me, waiting to be pulled back into reality. And now that it had, I couldn't escape it. I was lost, consumed by my own darkness. The phone rang again. This time, I didn't answer.